Hey everyone, this is Stacy Lindis from Podcast PD, a proud member of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to right now. The opinions expressed are those of the individual host. Make sure you check out all of the other great podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com and get ready because the learning begins in 3, 2, 1.
A dysregulated staff will have dysregulated students. And when we are coming in and feeling so reactive, and when we're anxious about all that's on our plates as educators today, I mean, we're entering the testing season now, right? This is March.
Yep.
And April. I mean, one of the things that I'm sharing with districts, and again, the leadership of a building is critical to educator well-being.
Welcome to the Burned In Teacher Podcast. I'm Amber Harper, and the educators on this podcast are brave enough to share their stories of burnout with the world. On BIT, we get real, we get honest, and we take action. Action against the burnout with stories from burned out teachers, advice from experts, and actionable steps you can take today to beat the burnout and become a happier, more fulfilled human being. Let's get started. Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Burned In Teacher Podcast. This is one part burnout and all other parts action, inspiration, and support for teachers dealing with burnout. Last week and last month, we talked a lot about how to create better balance in our schools and in our classrooms and in our life. How's that going? Let me know. Either on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. Let me know how it's going with your balance in your life. Take pictures or screenshots of things you're doing to take control and tag me at Burned In Teacher. Today is episode 28 and the first episode in a new month where our theme is all about trauma in my classroom and my life is burning me out. Before we jump into this interview, I'm so excited to tell you that this episode is brought to you by two incredible events that are coming up in the Burned In Teacher world. The first one is, of course, the Burned In Teacher Tribe program, also known as the Burned In Teacher Small Group program, that starts the week of April 8th. If you're feeling isolated, unbalanced, unsupported, and just overall burned out of teaching and life, this is the program for you. Starting the week of April 8th, as a small group, we'll be meeting once a week for 1-hour group calls where we'll talk all things action, inspiration, and support for your specific needs, as well as lessons on how you can bring more burned in into your career and life. And you'll get access to our private Burned In Teacher Tribe Facebook group where you'll meet other BIT mentors. These are graduates of previous programs who are continuing to burn in by sharing wins as they continue their Burned In Teacher journey. Don't wait. There are only a few spots open for the Spring 19 program, and we'd love to have you join us. Go to burnedinteacher.com/BIT coaching to learn more. The other exciting event that this episode is brought to you by is the Renew, Recharge, and Reignite Teacher Wellness Retreat that my good friend Kim Strobel and I are co-hosting together. This 2-day retreat is your chance to step outside of the classroom and step back into your life. You'll learn tips, tricks, and techniques for injecting happiness back into your teaching practice and your personal life. You'll leave burnout behind and walk away renewed, recharged, and reignited with courage and confidence to face next year's challenges. You'll learn 5 happiness habits to increase personal and professional positivity, methods for fostering relationships with students and coworkers, how to accept your past journey and make plans for changing your future path, and ways to rebrand yourself as an educator and human being, and much, much more. It will be held June 10th and 11th in Nashville, Indiana, a beautiful and quaint town in central Indiana. And I have to tell you, seats are limited, so don't wait to register. Right now, Kim and I are offering a fast action bonus of $60 off of the standard ticket price if you register by April 15th, so don't wait. Check out bit.ly/teacher retreat or burnedinteacher.com/retreat to learn more and register. And don't forget to bring a teacher friend, because that accountability is going to be critical as you leave this transformational event and move into your summer and eventually your brand new school year. Go to bit.ly/teacher retreat or burnedinteacher.com/retreat to learn more today. Today, I'm so excited to share my conversation with Dr. Lori Desautels. She's an assistant professor at Butler University in Indianapolis. Lori's passion is engaging her students through neuroscience in education, integrating mind-brain teaching and learning strategies into her courses at Marian and now Butler University. Lori has conducted workshops throughout the United States and abroad, and in this episode, Dr. Desautels shares her experiences with working with students coming from traumatic backgrounds and will educate us on the 4 parts of educational neuroscience. She's also going to take us through several steps that we can take to co-regulate students who are becoming escalated in our classrooms. She's also going to talk about how we, as educators, can co-regulate ourselves, especially after we've gone through trauma in our own lives, and ways we can help ourselves and our coworkers who are suffering through traumatic experiences in their lives. I'm so excited to share this interview with you, so let's jump in. Dr. Desautels, thank you so much for being on the podcast today to talk to us about student trauma and teacher trauma.
I'm just thrilled to be here, and it's unfortunately, but then fortunately, the door is widening to some mental health and emotional health challenges for our students across the country. But then the fortunate thing is that we now understand the research is really informing our practices for ourselves, our well-being, and for our students.
It's got a lot of breadth and a lot of depth within that topic. So let's start with you. I'd love to learn more about your journey in education and how you started and how you got to what it is that you're doing now.
Sure. So I am a former special education teacher, and when I began teaching, I taught children in a self-contained classroom with the classification of emotionally disturbed. And in the early 90s and late 80s, oftentimes in a self-contained classroom, you had a variety of what we call now neurodiversity. So I had children and adolescents who came with the classification or ruling of autism, specific learning disabilities, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So, but as I look back and what we did not know then, when we use the classification of oppositional defiant disorder, or we look at conduct disorder or reactive attachment disorder, all of those disorders listed in the DSM, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for clinicians. And I believe we have a DSM. I should know this. I think it's 5 revised or 6. But the point is that many of these children and adolescents have experienced significant adversity in their lives. And really, when we talk about those, that is what I started doing, was working with children that at the time I did not understand what I understand now, but the emotional disturbance was really a brain that had wired to the experiences of toxic stress. So after leaving the classroom, I was in the classroom for 7 years. My colleague and I opened up a counseling center for children with behavioral and emotional challenges and their families. So I did that and then worked at Methodist Hospital here in Indianapolis on the adolescent psychiatric unit as a school liaison. So we really kind of mediated and helped the adjustment of returning to school or leaving school when there was some type of a psychiatric crisis. And then I had my own family of 3 children and went back to school then for my doctorate. And at that time, I really wanted to kind of move a little bit away from education and acquire more of a holistic view. So it's in philosophy, but my work was looking at middle school children, that young adults really that were struggling. And so for 2 years, I worked with 7th and 8th grade students in my field work. and really looked at what they were saying to themselves when things went awry. And a lot of that research was based upon Dr. Martin Seligman's work, who is really known for his work in positive psychology. So I began teaching at Marian University, and when I was at Marian, it struck me that we needed to understand how the brain learns, how the brain behaves, how the brain socializes, and what was beneath these behaviors we were seeing. And to be honest with you, 7-8 years ago, when I began this work in the application of educational neuroscience, it was met with, I can't even tell you how much resistance. My evaluations at Marian just were in the toilet. Graduate students were coming in with a mindset that it takes one effective teacher to change the culture of a classroom and a school.
Do you have an explanation to why you feel you were met with such resistance then?
It was really interesting. At the time that I was met with this resistance, which is really a gift, there was also the zero tolerance policy being implemented throughout districts and schools. And so for the smallest infractions, at that time, schools were thinking and were implementing practices where it was, just come down on these kids hard. And and they will learn their lesson through severe punishment. And all of that was happening at the same time. So what I was teaching, to the graduate students at Marian and what they had come to Marian with in their training was clashing. Mm-hmm. And so, but it's really interesting. I just listened to my heart and my mind. I have to say both. And I just intuitively, and again, it was stressful for me because when you're just met with such resistance, it's easy just to throw in the towel. And, but as the research began to pour in, and it took a while, but as that research was recognized, then we began to understand that when we punish in traditional ways, we are actually unintentionally activating the stress response systems in our brains and bodies. And we are oftentimes re-traumatizing children because we're just getting compliance or a little obedience, but we're not getting any type of a long-term behavioral shift or change. Mm-hmm. And so it's been quite a journey. And that was kind of a long answer to your question, but that's where, and when I came to Butler, when Dr. Shelley offered, when she just graciously offered a full-time faculty position to me, she really is a visionary. She saw this being so needed in our higher ed, College of Ed teaching programs, and our pre-service teachers needed this because we've moved away from behavior management. This calls for co-regulation now. So
is that the official title to this, is co-regulation rather than behavior management?
Yeah, I really, my colleague Michael McKnight and I prefer that, and we wrote about it, in our newest book, because really what we're seeing is you can't manage another human being. I mean, when you really think about it, we can only control ourselves, and to manage another is just really setting everybody up for failure. Mm-hmm. So when you look at the research, many of these children that come into our classrooms have not had the experiences of another healthy, emotionally attuned adult in those early years to model those behaviors and to lessen the, I'm trying to think, all the stimuli coming in to lessen those, all of that, what you hear, what you see, how you feel your way around the world. And we need a caregiver who is attuned to us and who can soothe and touch and use warm eye contact and calming motions so that we can move through our worlds in healthy ways.
So it sounds like you're ready to talk about what teachers can do to support their students going through trauma. But I have one quick question about something that you said.
Sure.
You started in the classroom and now you are doing what you're doing full time. Can you tell me, have you noticed a difference in the severity of this trauma? Is there an increase of it, or do you feel like it's always been there, but we are now bringing this into light?
I think that's a great question, and I really do feel it's been there, but I also feel there has been an increase. And I don't think any of us can say definitively why, but I do feel it's multifaceted. Mm-hmm. So I think there has always been, there's been this challenge in the Western part of the world for us to, feel like we can share vulnerability and we can share, our anxieties. Mm-hmm. But I do feel with the increase in poverty, we really are, our children are still the poorest population, in our country, our children. And so poverty affects so many other aspects of the adverse childhood experiences mm-hmm. that kids come in with. Mm-hmm. So, and then we have an increase in the drug, epidemic and in addiction. So, and it's not just the opioid epidemic that has been highlighted, but, also in, other areas of the country, there's been a lot of addiction issues in our, more urban areas too, that mm-hmm. has not been given, the headline mm-hmm. that the opioid epidemic has been given. So I think it's multifaceted. Mm-hmm. And I think that, we are seeing an increase, but we also are opening that door of awareness so that it feels safe or feels safer to share.
Mm-hmm. You're so right. So tell us some things as educators working with kids in our classrooms every day, or as administrators working mm-hmm. with students. What are some ways that we can help support these students who are acting outwardly because mm-hmm. of this trauma in their life?
So this is going to sound so trite, and it's going to sound, well, duh, this is, we know this, but when we think about the application of what the research is sharing, and as I mentioned, when our children are coming in so rough, and as you've heard me say, and so dysregulated, that is what we're really seeing is a child or an adolescent who has not had consistent, repetitive, patterned relationships. And so we know that attachment is the carrier of all development. And children who come into our classrooms and adolescents who are not securely attached. And again, we see children, an increase in foster care, children coming from the foster care system, because 80% of DCS, CPS calls are about neglect in our country right mm-hmm. now. And that's another adversity that is multifaceted. So these children, when you're moving from home to home, or you have unpredictable chronic adversity, it wears and tears on brain architecture. So in looking at what we can do, building these relationships and building and strengthening attachments with these children and adolescents is the first piece of this. Mm-hmm. And that is so much easier said than done, because it is really hard to feel that warm exchange when a child has screamed at you or has shown such disrespect. And part of the work that I'm doing right now with Butler is I have a course release, and so I'm in the classroom. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't really feel comfortable even doing this podcast with you if I weren't in the classroom. So 2 mornings or a morning and an afternoon a week, I'm with middle school students this semester, just because I don't want to I never ever want to become removed from what educators are experiencing. And I get the same. It doesn't change when I'm in the classroom. So I think that I would say that the biggest thing we can do is when a child or adolescent escalates, it's been traditionally practiced that we escalate with them, not intentionally, but sometimes we find ourselves in the power struggle or in the conflict cycle. And one of the things that I want to say to educators is that we need to step away at that point, and we need to take care of our own brain state, because a dysregulated adult cannot regulate a student. So not only do we need to step away and take our 3 deep breaths or 10, but we also need to model that for our students, because they come to school with little to no experience of how to get calm. So really this educational neuroscience has 4 legs. Attachment relationship is one of those legs. Co-regulation is another, giving students a sensory opportunity to regulate their nervous system, whether that is through sound, whether it's through breathing, whether it's through a touch, whether it's through movement. And then the other 2 legs of this, we are teaching students about their neuroanatomy. That is what I say to teachers. And one of the things that I want to share is that you don't have to be an expert. When I go across the country sharing this, it is so, we are, we typically think because we are a teacher or an administrator that we should be the experts in our content. And I want to say, how cool is it to be able to talk about the amygdala with your students, and you both are learning at the same time? You just don't have to be the expert. In fact, it levels the playing field, and it builds a relationship when you're learning about this together. So that's the 3rd leg of this. So we've got attachment, we've got regulation, we've got learning about our own neuroanatomy, and then the 4th and most important leg of this framework is our brain state. It's educator brain state, because we just cannot do this well when our cortisol and adrenaline and our stress response systems are activated.
Can you tell me of any good resources that we could send teachers to, either online or through books? Because I know what it's like as a teacher to be told that we really should do this. We really should build these relationships. Right. We really should pay attention to our brain state. But the question always becomes, okay, I will do that, but how?
Yes. So I absolutely can share. So we, Edutopia, I write for them. And for probably the past 2 years, the last 15 articles that I've written that are based in research and evidence are about building connections and attachments through the conflict. And also my website, which is revelationsineducation.com, has a lot of good resources. Would I be able to share a couple right now during the podcast?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So,
yes, go for it.
Let's say, and again, this is what we want to focus on is the process. We don't want to focus on the end product, because you're not brain architecture, whether it's healthy brain architecture, connections that have wired and fired together for the purpose of compassion, the purpose of being able to empathize, or those experiences of shutting down and turning off or reacting in a real negative way. Those happen based on our own experiences, and they take a while to develop. So they're not going to go away just overnight. So one of the things that we're talking about with regard to attachment are touch points. And I share with teachers, there is an old strategy that was discovered and researched well in the 1980s. I shouldn't say old, because it wasn't that long ago, but it's called the 2x10 strategy. And it's where you take a student some of your toughest kids, and you really are intentional. At 2 minutes for 10 days in a row, you talk with them about their passion, about what they did over the weekend, about how their game went, or how their performance was, or what did you have for dinner, or who, what are you, tell me some great music that you're listening to. Mm-hmm. And for 2 minutes, 10 days in a row, this is a way to really strengthen attachment, because as Rita Pierson says, we work for people we like. We respect people who respect us. Mm-hmm. So that is a touch point that we are sharing with teachers. Another one is validation. And I am horrible at this. This is one I'm working on constantly, because you hear validation and you think, oh, I know how to validate. But really what we typically do is a student will tell us something. They'll be upset and they'll say, well, that's just not fair. Or, you didn't do anything when she, yelled out. Mm-hmm. And so what we'll do is we will respond with an answer to their complaint. And we tend to get escalated. But what really strengthens relationships is when you hear the feeling beneath the words and you mirror that. So a validation is not encouraging them. It's not then asking a question, so what do you need? Not yet. But it's really saying, wow, you sound so frustrated. Or this must feel awful to you. And then you stop and you just wait until they respond, because if you're correct, they will let you know. Mm-hmm. And if you're way off the mark, they will also let you know. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So validation is, another touch point that we are using with students, and really using bell work, and using morning meeting, and using a 2 or 3 minute or 5 minute time at the end of the day to create a ritual or a closure, so that we are what John Cita calls creating family privilege in the classroom. Mm. And what I mean by that is many of our students are returning home to environments of chronic unpredictability. And they really look to school mm-hmm. for those structures and those boundaries and that predictability. So having a chant, having a routine, having a check-in at the end of the day, where we, share an affirmation, or we share, just a visual, anything, is really, really significant. So I think the way that we're using, with our middle school students, we're using bell work and morning meeting time to really prime the brain for learning. Mm-hmm. And it's because kids who come in a survival brain state do not have this prefrontal cortex functioning to learn anything. I mean, they come in so rough that doesn't matter mm-hmm. how good you are as a teacher or how well you lead a school. If your students are coming in rough and we're not taking the time to teach them how to breathe deeply, to teach them how powerful movement is, to teach them about rhythm, to teach them and to give them opportunities to use sensory stimuli, then we're not meeting them in brain development. Mm.
So I have a question for you, because my next question is, can you give me a visualization of what this looks like? But I'm going to actually flip this, and I'm going to tell you what I did, because I noticed that this was a problem. And this is before I knew about brain state. I just noticed a detachment between my students and I. Mm-hmm. And I felt like we needed to have that time to get to know each other a little bit better. So let me tell you what I put into practice this past a year ago in January, when I was in the class full time. Mm-hmm. I decided over Christmas break, I said something has to change, because we're just speeding right into our day. And I don't feel like this is good for the kids, because we aren't having a time to slow down, because they just come in hot every day. Right.
Right.
We're not having a time to get ourselves calm and get ourselves ready for learning. So They would come in. We would have our morning routine of them putting their stuff away, going to the bathroom, that kind of thing. I would play a transition song to come to the carpet.
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing we would do is we would have kind of a student of the day. We just went in alphabetical order, and they would start by coming to the front if they chose to, and they would lead us through kind of these sentence stems. Hi, my name is blank, and today I am feeling blank because blank. And then some kids could ask them questions about either how they were feeling, and they would also say, this week, this is happening in their life. So we would know something that's coming up. All right. Mm-hmm. And then they would lead us through our classroom. It was kind of like I called it a mantra, but really it was just kind of our saying. And it just kind of took us through, just why we're here and what kind of a day we're going to have and that kind of thing. We would say that every single day together. And then we would I found on Go Noodle that they have this section called flow. So every day then they would get to choose the flow, and we would do one of those. It's more centered around meditation and being still and paying attention to our bodies and things like that. So we would do that, and then we would move into our lesson. Does that sound like something that is along the lines of what you're describing? And I guess what kind of feedback would you give me on that? And then what types of things have you seen teachers do with their students?
So you're doing those routines that you have set up, and those really are routines or rituals, because they know what to expect when they come in, and they know there's going to be some time to share. So I love, and Go Noodle is such a great resource for us because there are movement activities, there's dancing, there's meditation. We don't use the term meditation in the classroom. We use the term focused attention practices.
Okay. And I used mindfulness. We talked about being mindful.
And mindfulness, absolutely. And so what you set up is fabulous. One of the things that we know is that when kids come in, like you said, hot, and when they come in rough, sometimes, and I'm sure you saw this too, they weren't even able to share with you how they were feeling with words. Sometimes, because we always when we do circle time, like similar to what you do, we'll give them the option to pass. And a lot of times kids will pass. I see that, a lot. And so one of the things that I would suggest is really because we know the cortex, the prefrontal cortex, that's the language of words. But when kids come in rough, sometimes they don't have the words, and they don't want to share the words, and they really don't know how they feel. So I am loving our sensation word wall that we're using, where in a circle, the students can come in, pick a sensation word off the wall, and they draw it. And they give it a shape, and they give it a color, and they might give it a size. And it can be just a scribble, it could be an object, because it's much easier to really explain it. Instead of saying I'm feeling sad or I'm feeling angry, it's to know that I'm teary, or I'm edgy, or I'm shaky, or I'm calm, or I'm stuck, or those are sensation words. And we actually, as a class, created some of the ones that my 7th graders created were gooey and butterfly-ish and numb. And so we let them, they actually created some of those sensation words.
I'm really happy to hear that you have something like that, because that's something that I struggled with. Is I wanted them to share feelings, but it was either happy or sad.
Yeah,
and I feel like that is it's just not enough. I always felt that.
It really, my colleague at Butler, Dr. Oliver, I love what she says about how we need to expand the feeling vocabulary of our students, but we do. I agree with her. But sometimes we don't even know we just don't know those feelings. But we know when our stomach, when we feel shaky, we can describe that, because a sensation is a physicalized emotion. I don't know if that's a word, but it is today. a
Makes
physicalized
complete
emotion.
sense to me.
Yeah. And so, and Dan Siegel says, what you can name, you can tame, and what's shareable is bearable. So using your morning meeting time for art is very important. We're giving them an opportunity to draw that sensation, because when you draw it and you give it that color and that size and that shape, you are actually taking it out of your body and putting it in a container outside of you where it's safe. When you can say, I'm really shaky today, and you draw it, it's almost like you're relieving that sensation. You're lessening it by naming it and drawing it. And that feels it's calming to the nervous system. And there's a lot of research to back that up. We know art, and we know, anytime you draw with any type of medium, I mean, not any type, but we start with something that is, like markers or colored pencils, or, just a pen, you can just take a pen or pencil and just etch what you want to. But those type of opportunities, and we're also drumming in our morning meeting, and we're using our laps, and we're clapping or snapping, and you don't even have to have a drum. But we're pulling up. I use YouTube all the time, and they have metronome beats. Because the calming beat is between 60 and 80 beats per minute. So we'll put a metronome, or I'll put music on. You can Google music, 60 to 80 beats per minute. And then the kids will make up their own rhythm pattern. And so then we follow it.
Does that have to do with the heartbeat?
It absolutely does. And that it's that parasympathetic response, that response when we're calm, when it's that coherent heart rhythm. And so actually it goes 40 to 60. They have music that's 40 to 60 beats per minute, and then 60 to 80 beats per minute. But in that range is it's very regulating, because that heart rate that is has found a coherent pattern.
Thank you so much for explaining that to us. That helps.
Absolutely.
That helps me to get a better understanding of what this practice actually looks like in a classroom day to day.
And it doesn't. One of the things we know is that it doesn't look the same in any classroom. I mean, that's what's the thing that we have in common when educators in schools and districts are implementing this framework, they are using the 4 legs, but it all looks very different. So we're using these sequined pillows. These.
Those are fun.
Yeah, and these are very regulating. I mean, these truly, when you can sit and you can hold it, there's pressure, and it feels comforting. And then you can actually draw initials. You could draw a design, or you could just move it and look at the patterns and move back and forth. We have found that this has been, we'll pass the pillow around, or this will be part of our amygdala first aid area. The same thing with hand warmers that you put inside of mittens. And with our younger kids, we will, they'll pass it around, and they'll feel the warmth in their hands. And as they hold it, they'll take 3 deep breaths and pass it to the next person in the circle. So again, sometimes kids don't have the words, but that's meeting them in development, when we're tapping into the sensations.
So I'd like to kind of switch the conversation over to our teachers, because unfortunately, students are not the only humans in school buildings that are going through some sort of trauma in their life. And although it probably looks different, because of, just being older, and having different types of problems, and I don't even know if that's safe to assume, but teachers are dealing with trauma in their lives. Do you have any advice to offer them as they go into their classrooms and schools?
Well, first of all, thank you for asking that question, because a dysregulated staff will have dysregulated students. And when we are coming in and feeling so reactive, and when we're anxious about all that's on our plates as educators today, I mean, we're entering the testing season now, right? This is March.
Yep.
And April. I mean, this is, and our test scores they need to show student growth, they need to show building growth, and we get letter grades. And it's just, it can unnerve us.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that I'm sharing with districts, and again, the leadership of a building is critical to educator well-being. And I am encouraging and begging administrators, all of these strategies that we are wanting children to have, I want the building administrator to give to his or her staff. So focused attention practices every morning as a staff. Having an area in the building where teachers can go and have some nice distilled water, grab a handful of almonds, write in a journal, pick up an affirmation out of an affirmation jar, doodle a little bit, hold a sequined pillow, put some nice scented hand lotion on, have a section of aromatherapy with a little lavender, and have a basket of cotton balls that a teacher can pick up in the morning, take 3 deep breaths. There's a lot of research behind some of the essential oils that are very regulating to the nervous system. That research is just beginning to come in. But all of these ways, when you model those with your staff, then you have a staff who are feeling not only calmer, but there's buy-in, and they will be more willing to try these with students. As I share with
No, go ahead.
As I share with administrators, your building is your classroom. And as I share with superintendents, your district is your classroom. Yeah. So we have here's another connection. You know those waiter pads? Yes. You've heard, I think when you've heard, so you know that you can get them on Amazon or Walmart, or you can make your own. It's called Take Your Order. So we're encouraging not only teachers to take your order of different students. So we'll take 2 students' order a day. So you ask them, what do you need from me today? What can I do for you today? And so the students will say, I want it, at least my kids have said, I want an extra bathroom break. I want you to notice when I'm frustrated. I want you to move me away from so-and-so. I want to sit in a different spot. I want to leave the classroom when I'm frustrated. So I write all of those down without judgment. And I say to my students, I'm going to try to at least get 1 or 2 of these, but if I can. And administrators need to be using this strategy with their staff. What do you need from me today?
It's so interesting to hear you say that, because I when I was teaching full time, I would say this: I would not want to run my classroom in a way that projected a school that I wouldn't want to work for, so if I wouldn't want my principal to say something to me, I wouldn't say it to my students. And I love that you're bringing this up, because even though we're talking about students versus teachers going through trauma, we're still humans going through trauma. And it doesn't really seem to me, in what you're saying, that there's a whole lot of difference in how we should be taught to handle those emotions that we're feeling.
Right. Absolutely. And it's got to be consistent too. You know, we've got to be in tune. We have to build those healthy and strengthen those connections with our staff. And you know, I've always said, if a building or a district or a classroom, there are 2 facets to academic and emotional and mental well-being. And that is, if we feel safe and if we feel felt, we will learn. And that really models how the brain develops, from the back to the front and from the inside out. Because the brain stem, when we're functioning from those lower areas, that brain stem is asking, am I safe? So those kids that come in mistrusting adults are really looking around, and everything they perceive in that state of brain function looks and feels like a threat. And they are reading our nonverbal, much like the teachers in our building. I know when I am in a stress response state, I'm not listening to words. I'm trembling, I'm not thinking clearly, and I'm not trusting my environment the way I need to.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a developed brain. So, we have this incredible opportunity to be like Joe Bolte-Taylor says, you are a neural sculptor in your classroom. And as an administrator, you are a neural sculptor for your educators.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so intermingled, and it's really very holistic when the framework is implemented well.
So just like I asked you with the students in a teacher's class who is implementing these practices, can I give you a scenario of a teacher and a principal? And would you tell me what you would hope that a principal who is trying to support this teacher's well-being would react?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Okay, so there's a staff meeting or a meeting with a grade level about new testing expectations. And it's very flyby. This is what we're doing. This is when it needs to be done. We don't have a whole lot of time to go into detail for everything, but it has to be done by this date. And by the way, that date is in a week and a half. Mm-hmm. And you have a teacher or teachers who exude extreme frustration verbally, leave angry, and say angry things at the end of that meeting. Like, I don't know when I'm supposed to get this done. I guess I'll just take time away from my prep period, or something that could come across as disrespectful, but they are clearly experiencing stress. Mm-hmm. What would you hope that a principal who hears this would respond? How do you hope that they would respond to that?
Well, so again, another great question. And it's no different than how we would want to respond to our students. And that is the very first thing that came to mind, because I could feel, as you described that scenario, I was right there. Mm-hmm. And it's validating how that teacher is feeling. It is validating and saying, this must feel overwhelming to you. This must feel impossible to do in the next week and a half. And then I would wait to hear, because that to be validated first feels safe, and you feel connected. Mm-hmm. And so as an administrator, if these regulations were put upon me, because typically that's what happens as a school leader, I'm not making these up. These are handed down to me.
Right. And
so I'm in a stress response state because my secondary or elementary director has said this has to be done. Mm-hmm. So I would validate for a few minutes, and I would learn as much as I could about the feeling level. Mm-hmm. And then once there was some calm, because what I'm doing is I'm co-regulating with my staff. And when we're co-regulating with our staff, then we are not only learning more about how they feel, but we are helping and assisting them to really be at their very, very best in moments of high stress. Mm-hmm. And then I would share my own frustration. There's nothing more powerful than being transparent. And I would share, I am feeling how you are feeling, because this is exactly when I started this meeting today, I could have done it differently. And I was in a stress response state. So I think, again, it's that attachment, and so validating, and then asking those 3 questions that for me are a game changer. And these are touch points. And those questions, but we never ask them if everybody's hot and everybody's dysregulated. We only ask those questions when we are both calming down and we are at that calm state of prefrontal cortex functioning. And so after validating and after being transparent and sharing my own frustration and sharing, I probably could have done this in a much different way, how I handed down this work to you all, I would then begin to ask, what do you need from me? How can I help? Please let me know how I can help. And then what can we do to make this better? And you may not know those answers right now, but I want you to think about them and then come back to me. I'm here for you this afternoon. I'm here for you today. I'm here this week.
Mm-hmm. I love those questions. They're so simple, but so powerful.
Mm-hmm. They really are. And they, and I have seen, and what they transcend all ages.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it doesn't have to change depending on whether you're teaching kindergarten or a high school senior.
Yep.
Love it. Or a teacher.
A teacher, yeah, or a colleague.
Right. Oh, for sure.
Absolutely.
Give me a little bit of insight about that. Let's say you're a colleague of someone who you are teaching with. Your teaching partner is really, really struggling. Mm-hmm. Would you say the exact same things for them as well? And let's say, the trauma has nothing to do with that teacher, with that colleague, but they're just really noticing some serious stress coming from this
Mm-hmm.
teacher. How do you approach that in a professional and a non-invasive way? Because sometimes even teachers, they don't ask for the support that they need,
Right.
Because they feel either embarrassed,
right.
or like they don't want to drag other people down. They don't want to be looked at as negative. I know that's how I felt for sure when I was going through my season of burnout. I kept it all inside, even though it was radiating from me.
Mm-hmm.
I kept it inside, and I didn't want anybody to know that I was feeling so terrible.
Right. And, there is, to me, and I don't know if everyone would agree with this, but I feel there is this unspoken association with the word educator or teacher, because traditionally we work in silos, and traditionally we feel like if we are not perceived as strong and as happy and as grateful, then we are not enough. It's just, we are not enough. And especially when you are working with difficult students, you feel defeated. I mean, I think of that word defeated and you feel so often hopeless. So if I see that in my colleague, depending on the relationship that I have and to what degree, I always think a letter, a little note in their mailbox. Mm-hmm. I noticed that that you seemed sad or you seemed overwhelmed. Please let me know what I can do for you. Noticing is another touch point. We encourage teachers to really notice, and it's so different than praising, but just notice, a new pair of shoes, or notice a haircut, or notice a smile, or notice someone being, really just coming in extremely upset. I mean, we just notice. We don't evaluate or praise, but we just notice that. So I do feel that with a colleague, we would use those same type of strategies, which we're co-regulating. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We're co-regulating. And that's really what we do as parents. I know if I had known this research when my 3 children were little, I would have parented very differently.
Yeah.
I mean, I would have been a different mom. Mm-hmm. And again, no regrets, but, I can look back and think how, I became so involved, and I got just swept up in the conflict and in the power struggle. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I was disciplining when I was so dysregulated. I mean, I can see it, I can feel it, I can picture it. Mm-hmm. So, whether it's with our colleagues or, it really is about us all. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so, so much for sharing all of this information. The more that you share, the more simplified it becomes. Although I'm sure in practice, it is not as simple, but the idea itself is simply, it comes back to those relationships, those touch points.
Right.
So,
those touch points and that co-regulation piece is really what the framework is about.
Dr. Desautels, is there anything else that you would like to share with our listeners today?
I would love to share that we have a new book out, and it just came out in January, and it is about everything we've discussed on this podcast today. My colleague Michael and I spent all last year working together and writing this together. And what I love about this book, it's called Eyes Are Never Quiet, Looking Beneath the Behaviors of Our Most Troubled Students. And I love that it has the why at the beginning of the book. And then you'll see the book has a black spine. And then at the end are pages that give, okay, I understand the why, now what do I do? And so we intentionally created a section of brain-aligned evidence-based strategies that are for bell work, brain intervals, morning meetings, focused attention practices, all of the things we've discussed today.
Thank you for sharing that. Are you finding that schools are doing book studies on this as a staff?
Yes. I think, it's really, when you can sit and you can really talk about, a scenario and then say, I tried this strategy. How did this work for you? I do feel that book studies are just a great way really to build relationships, to create, their touch points. Book studies are touch points. And even beginning to build out a book study with parents is another part of this too.
That's an incredible idea. Well, because our conversations get so deep and so serious on this podcast, I do like to end with a quick lightning round of this or that.
Absolutely.
So are you familiar with that setup?
I don't know, but I'm ready.
So I'll give you two choices and you'll just simply tell me which one you would choose.
Okay.
All right. Cookies or cake?
Cookies.
Cat or dog? And I saw both of those behind you.
Did you see it? So we have 3 cats and 3 rescue cats and 1 rescue dog who's sitting right in my chair, and she does not leave me.
So she's listening.
I don't know. I couldn't pick this or that. I have to say both.
Oh, that's okay. Computer games or video games?
I would say computer games.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the Burned In Teacher podcast. I cannot wait to get this episode out to share with our listeners. It is going to be so helpful to them.
Thank you, Amber. I really, really loved sharing with you today. So thank you for having me.
Anytime. So as you've probably noticed, both before downloading this episode and while listening to it, this is one of the longest episodes we've ever had. But because of the depth and breadth Dr. Desautels shared with us about this oh so important topic, I just couldn't split it up, and I felt like it needed to be one episode. So lots of tips and takeaways today. Number 1, schools are changing their perspective, and we're finally seeing a shift from a zero tolerance policy to trying to understand the brain and how it works, and how when we punish in traditional ways, we are re-traumatizing our students but aren't getting the long-term behavioral change that we and the students so desperately need. The second takeaway is we're moving away from classroom and behavior management and instead thinking about this as co-regulation, because you can't manage another human being, and that's so, so true. The third takeaway is students don't come to school with experiences with adults who can soothe and touch and give warm eye contact and warm emotions to them. So it becomes our job to become that adult mentor in their lives. The fourth takeaway is attachment is the carrier of all development. Oh, that's so powerful. I have to say that again. Attachment is the carrier of all development. When you have students moving from home to home, or they have unpredictable chronic adversity, building relationships and strengthening attachments is the only way to help them to make those connections, and therefore allowing them an environment where they can learn. When a child escalates, we unintentionally escalate and engage in a power struggle. take a second to step away and take care of your own brain state. Take between 3 and 10 deep breaths or more if you need it, not just for ourselves, but to model how to get ourselves calm in a stressful situation. The sixth takeaway is educational neuroscience has 4 parts. The first one is attachment relationship. The second one is co-regulation, that sensory opportunity. The third one is teaching students about neuroanatomy, learning with your students and building relationships by learning side by side about our own brains and how they work. And the fourth one is educator brain state. We don't respond well when our own stress response systems are activated, so we need to take steps to take care of our own brain state. And we've talked about this several times on the podcast. The seventh takeaway is there are lots of ways to deregulate, to focus on the process, not the end product. The first and my favorite one is the 2x10 strategy. This is intentional 2 minutes for 10 days in a row to talk to students about their passions or their lives, about them and their life to strengthen relationships. The second way to deregulate an escalating situation is to offer that student validation. That's saying things like, that must feel very blank, or this must make you feel so blank, or you sound so blank. Instead of answering a complaint or encouraging their escalation, hear the feeling and mirror that and wait for a response. The third way is by using bell work and morning meetings from 5 to 10 minutes, creating a ritual at the beginning and or the end of the day to create family privilege to the classroom. Because students are living in daily chronic unpredictability, and working with that daily ritual will help them with their mindfulness and focused attention practices that they need so desperately. The next way is students either can't identify or verbalize how they feel because they don't have the words. Students don't know how they feel. So using a sensation word wall can help students to explain. Instead of saying you feel sad or angry, they maybe feel stuck or shaky or teary or edgy or butterfly-ish. These are such great ways to help students to identify how they're feeling at different parts of their day. I love that she said this, and she was quoting Dan Siegel. What you can name, you can tame. What's shareable is bearable. And this sensory word wall is so essential in helping students to do that. Another way to help students to regulate is by drumming or clapping or snapping, using a metronome beat. And Lori said that you can find these on YouTube. It helps kids to make up their own pattern and beat to help them regulate. And like we sort of discovered, or like I discovered while we were talking, it really does have to do with a regulated heartbeat. Another way is by using sequined pillows or passing hand warmers around and taking deep breaths to calm down students who are needing some calm in their life. This last section of tips and takeaways has everything to do with teachers dealing with trauma or stress or anxiety. Dr. Desautels said that a dysregulated staff will create dysregulated students, and isn't that true? She suggests that everything that we offer to students in our classrooms, administrators should do to co-regulate their staff by offering a space that is calming. Principals, when you model these practices with your staff will be more inspired and encouraged to bring those practices into their classrooms for their kids. Consistency is key. If a building or a district or a classroom practices the following quote, they're going to be a much more co-regulated space. So here it is. If we feel safe and we feel felt, we will learn. I'll say that again. If we feel safe and we feel felt, we will learn. That's such a powerful statement, both for teachers and students alike. So validate, be transparent. Ask these 3 questions, both to teachers, and teachers ask these to students. These are game-changing questions when both parties are in a calm state. Are you ready? Here they are. What do you need from me? How can I help you? What can we do together to solve this? How we support a colleague who is struggling or feeling defeated or helpless is by noticing. dropping a note that validates and shares that you're there for them should they choose to come to you for support is really, really essential in building that relationship and helping them to feel connected and understood. And that, of course, is what I'm going to end with. Noticing. Building relationships is all about paying attention, noticing things that are different about your students, both positive and negative, bringing it up in a conversation, noticing new shoes, a new haircut, or if they come in extremely upset, acknowledging those feelings and having a conversation about them can make a huge difference. If you've stuck with us to the end, I'm so appreciative, and I know that this is going to be a very powerful episode in helping you to change your perspective on the behaviors of your students, especially if they're going through trauma or if you've gone through trauma in the past. I would definitely advise that you listen to this again, take notes, and of course, you can access all of the show notes from this episode and other episodes at burnedinteacher.com/podcast. Until next week, I wish you a career and life full of happiness and fulfillment. You just took another step to become a burned-in teacher. Burn on. That's it for this week's episode of the Burned In Teacher podcast. Until next week, take a deep breath. You are your own hero, and you just took another step to becoming a burned-in teacher. Burn on. If you want to be updated on the latest Burned In Teacher podcast episodes, don't forget to subscribe to the Burned In Teacher podcast on Google Play or iTunes. Also, please consider leaving a review and leave a rating so that other teachers who are feeling the burnout can find this podcast to help them feel supported as they continue their journey out of burnout. Thanks so much.